with the attack on Pearl Harbor, the loyalty and the patriotism of Japanese Americans was called into question.
Hundreds of thousands of people were forced to sell their homes or leave their homes and businesses within a very short period of time, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and be relocated to a place where they were in camps, they were in prison, essentially.
Executive Order 9066 happened in February, stating that evacuation will occur. We had about a week's notice to pack up what you could carry and report to the assembly center. There was a list of things you could not take, radios and things you were not allowed to take. I left my favorite dolls, my favorite books, my piano was left. So in my suitcase, I had an autographed book from my friends and my clothes, and that was about it.
I was put into an internment camp only because I had Japanese blood. I had done nothing wrong. And we were assigned to a horse stall with another family, family of 3. Ours was a family of 5. And we filled a mattress cover with hay, and that was our mattress.
And all they did to the horse stalls was wash them out, whitewashed them, and the odor was still there.
My first night, I can still remember laying in my bed, trying to sleep, wondering what happened here. I'm an American citizen. What did I do wrong, you know? It was the lowest point. The first night was the lowest point in my life, I would say.
I had very little communication with my members of my family who were in the camps, very little. I just about knew where they were eventually. I had 2 older brothers. One older brother was incarcerated in the Rower camp in Arkansas, behind barbed wire. Second older brother was incarcerated in the Manzanar camp in Eastern California. And my mother and the younger members of the family were put into the Poston camp in the middle of the Arizona desert, near Parker, Arizona. So my family was in 3 different camps behind barbed wire.
One of my uncles, his family was sent to Manzanar. And to get to Manzanar, you have to go across the California desert. And they were being shipped by train. And the shades were pulled down, and the speculation, the rampant speculation on the train, he said that everybody was afraid that what was going to happen to them was they were going to stop the train in the middle of the desert. They were going to be taken in the middle of the desert and shot, just like they were doing to the Jews in Germany.
I think there were many Americans who would rise up in protest were the government to suggest something like that today, whereas almost no one rose up in protest against that during World War II.
I think the reason why there wasn't an uprising or anything when they said we were going to camp is because we were brought up not only in the American way, but we were brought up by parents who had come from Japan, and we were always taught that the authority was right. And you shouldn't do anything to disgrace your family if your father said, don't rebel. And if you did, then you're a disgrace to your family name. And that was very important to us. We felt, is this the way we have to live in this one room? And you had to walk to the latrine, you had no privacy. If we said we didn't like being cooped up in this camp behind barbed wires, they would say to us, "Shikata nai, this is where the government put us." And so we have to make the best of it. None of us revolted. We were carrying on life as if we were on the outside.
There were basically 2 thoughts that were formed. One thought was, well, my constitutional rights were abridged. I'm here against my will. There was no due process, no trial, and why should I fight for this country? And the thought was, when my rights are restored, I will fight for this country. There was another group that felt, yes, my rights were abridged. Yes, I'm here against my will, but this is still my country, and I'm still an American. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm willing to serve.
When I first put on that uniform of a private of U.S. Army, it was a tremendous change that came over me. I felt whole again. They took away my civil rights. They put me in a concentration camp only because of racial prejudice. And yet, I never lost faith in America.
And then the government questioned us about our loyalty, and they decided that the camp in Tule Lake would be the camp that all the dissidents and anyone who made any kind of problems in camp would be taken.
My parents were sent to Tule Lake, and when I went to Tule Lake, I was taken aback to see rows and rows of tar-papered barracks behind barbed wire. And when I looked up, I saw a soldier wearing the same uniform as mine, with a machine gun.
When I finished my basic training, we were all given passes. So from Illinois, I went to Arizona to visit my mother in this camp, this posting camp. Huge camp. It was not a happy visit, but at least I got to see my mother and a couple of the younger members of my family. And then that's when it really struck me as to what the evacuation meant. Here are these thousands of people in these barracks in the middle of the Arizona desert, guarded by watchtowers with armed guards, barbed wire around the camps. It was very depressing.
I saw my parents and siblings, and we greeted each other with a smile, but inside we were crying because it was quite devastating to see my parents and siblings removed from their comfortable home, deprived of their rights, deprived of their dignity.
In total, I was there for 3.5 years, almost. I didn't leave until 1945. You have no control what the government tells you to do. You just go along, and you make the most of your life. You don't dwell on it. You don't dwell that you're behind bars. You've lost all your freedom. You make the most of what you have. So if you want to go to college, you study like you're going to college, although you don't know when the camp is going to close, or if you would ever get home to California. And this is, I think, one of the things that kept most people going, is that they can't defeat you.
When I left the camp and I walked out of the camp as a free man, I looked back and I said to myself, I'm in an American uniform and I see my siblings behind barbed wire. I was angered. I was confused because as a child I recall that every morning I used to get up, stand at attention, pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. That pledge that ended with liberty and justice for all. And here I found my siblings behind barbed wire. Their only crime is that they look like the enemy.
There are many communities of color who are experiencing discrimination during the 30s and 40s, and they recognize that World War II is an unprecedented opportunity because for the first time, the U.S. government has to fight a war proclaiming their difference from a nation, Germany, that says the world should be organized according to racial terms. Not only that, we are going to create a final solution, death camps for people that we think should not be allowed to live. This is showing the ultimate philosophy of segregation taken to the nth degree. So when the US government, with this history in the United States, goes to fight the German government and define what makes the United States different from this evil Germany, this is an opportunity for people who've been discriminated against to say, look, we are loyal Americans, we are fighting, we're sacrificing. Just like other people, we're sending our fathers and brothers and sons to the war. We should be able to experience all of the rights and opportunities of other Americans. America should not be organized according to race. Negro men who want to show their patriotism, who want to demonstrate that they are willing to take up the burden of liberty, that they are willing to fight for the country when it is endangered. But in some cases, they're fighting for freedoms for other people that they don't have themselves. This notion of fighting on two fronts comes to be called the double victory movement. The Double V campaign is to win civil rights at home while winning the war abroad.
I said to myself, I'm fighting two wars, one against the enemy from abroad and prejudice at home.
When technically we were still classified as 4C, which means enemy alien.
The Japanese Americans, both in Hawaii and here, had to somehow prove themselves. And that was not easy to do, you know, when we were so closely identified with the enemy.
Well, I volunteered from the concentration camp because I felt that the only way to prove that I was a loyal American was to volunteer for the Army. And that was the only avenue that was open to me.
There is one very important unit, the 442nd, which is completely made up of Japanese Americans who fight for the US government, who fight for the American cause primarily in Italy, but in Europe during World War II, and they're a very highly decorated unit.
The saying goes that if the job was hard, give it to the 442nd. Go for broke is a Hawaiian slang. And the way it applies to the 442nd is that they are all volunteers originally. And they went into combat with that spirit, that they were going to give everything that they had for the sake of proving their loyalty to the government that had once disowned them.
That drove the Japanese American soldiers to a higher level of commitment, which made them fight harder and more ferociously than I think normal.
They went to war to prove their loyalty. When the 442nd returned from Italy, President Truman reviewed the troops and said, you fought the enemy abroad and you fought prejudice at home and you won. That was the first official, highest level effort to turn the tide of prejudice and discrimination the other way.
The question was, how did Japanese Americans prove their loyalty? They died for it.
Few people living at the time could imagine what a society would be like if it wasn't segregated. So the military was segregated because America was segregated. Black men, Negro men fought in Negro units. The Japanese unit, that's an all-Japanese unit. White men fought in white units. Latino men, depending on what they looked like, if they looked white, they fought in white units. If they looked brown, they fought in colored units during the war. There was a lot of racism in the military during World War II. No Congressional Medal of Honor is given to any person, any Negro troop. These were men who served with great valor and in a number of cases, the officers on the scene had put the paperwork in for them to get medals, but it was stopped by higher level authorities. There are numerous instances that white and black American soldiers mention where German POWs are better treated than black troops.
Well, you know, in World War II, we had more than one enemy, you know. We had Germans and Italians. Why were they not evacuated?
The Germans or the Italians descent people never thought they were going to be put in concentration camp, and their loyalty was never questioned.
There are some people who experience discrimination as a result of the fact that they're German or Italians, but there is nothing like the level of governmental and popular support for relocation as there is for the Japanese. And frankly, we have to realize that this has something to do with racism. German Americans and Italian Americans were people of European descent. Japanese Americans are people of Asian descent, and the racism of the United States at that time made them more vulnerable.
Discrimination went on for a long time after the war. In fact, that was the time I felt the discrimination, not before.
When the Japanese Americans returned to their homes in California or on the West Coast, they were still met with discrimination. I mean, the resettlement for the remainder of the 1940s, I think, was still tough.
I was sitting in the living room of my house in East Los Angeles, trying to get psyched up to do my homework for the following day for classes. Then I heard this hysterical announcement over the radio that Japanese planes had bombed Pearl Harbor.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards.
Of course, the fact that my parents were Japanese immediately made me very uncomfortable.
This is a terrible, terrible shock. And immediately, war is declared because now a direct strike has been taken against the American people.
There was mass hysteria against Japanese. Japanese Americans were charged as saboteurs and as collaborators of the enemy. They were tarred with the same brush that condemned Imperial Japan.
Japanese Americans were considered enemy aliens.
There's a massive wave of anti-Japan and anti-Japanese feelings throughout the United States, really.
The Japanese aren't easy to know. I've lived among them for 10 years, and I can testify that they are as different from ourselves as any people on this planet.
Well, after Pearl Harbor, on December 7th, they surrounded Japanese town with the army with their rifles pointing in. Things became very uncomfortable if you were of Japanese ancestry. The music used to be playing Japanese songs all the time. And so when you walked down the street, you always heard music. All the music stopped after December 7th. And shortly after that, the curfews started, which limited how far we could travel. Rumors were just flying all over Japanese town that they were going to put us in these camps. They were going to separate the families. In fact, the worst rumor was they may even kill some of the people.
I was worried about the consequences of the prejudice being expressed, you know, and violence toward us and so forth, with absolutely no idea what could happen. But there was just this feeling that something was going to happen to us as a racial group.
A movement emerges which finally results in an executive order issued by President Roosevelt to remove Japanese immigrants and American citizens of Japanese descent from wherever they are on the West Coast and remove them to what are known as relocation camps in the interior of the United States. These are armed, locked military encampments guarded by the American military, to which people are forcibly removed.
Shortly after Pearl Harbor, there are thousands of Japanese American guys already in the military, and a lot of them just simply got kicked out.
Those who were served in the interior of the United States, they were okay. They continued to serve. Those who served on the west coast of the United States were discharged from the military, and they were sent home, and all of them were given draft classification 4C, for Charlie. And draft classification 4C is designated for enemy alien, unfit for military duty. If I may editorialize, how insulting, can that be to an American citizen?
We were under protective custody for 40 days, and many of my friends were discharged from the Army at the convenience of the government, and they were sent back, and they were under Executive Order 9066.
Many of them went home, helped their families pack, and went to camp with them. And then, despite that, when the call came for volunteers for the 442nd, they were among the first to stand up and join.
How does World War II change American society? First of all, it creates the opportunity for millions of Americans to enter the middle class, for millions of Americans to get higher education higher than high school. It creates the prosperity that allow people to have larger families, even in urban or suburban settings. It creates opportunities for women to demonstrate their capacities. There are a number of schools, law schools for example, that don't take women until after World War II. Fighting and risking your life, and indeed having some of your buddies die for this country, did make people more fearless in resisting the unfair laws of the country. The military is desegregated by President Truman in 1948, and that begins to be one of the important changes that is part of the larger history of the modern civil rights movement, which desegregated American society in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There's almost no aspect of American life that isn't changed in some fundamental way by World War II.
What happened during World War II should not be forgotten and should not be repeated.
If we talk about what the government could do to you, overnight you lose all your civil rights. It is a dangerous thing that could happen again.
September 11th did, I would say, cause a spike or a rise in fears about people who were from the Middle East and for people who are of Islamic faith.
So, people have friends that are Arab Americans, and the question is, what happens if tomorrow they're suddenly not there? If they're suddenly extracted from school and you don't know where they went? That's what happened in 1942 with the executive order. I mean, kids were taken out of school, and the following day they were gone. If you go back right after September 11th and you look at some of the public comments, what you hear is, we can't trust any Muslim. We need to round them all up. We need to detain them. We need to question them. We need to figure out who's loyal and who's not loyal. And so what you see is another possible attempt to sweep away the Constitution and the rights of American citizens.